Phil Collins is known the world over as one of the most notable figures in popular music, though the star hasn't had a very easy life. From his multitude of tumultuous marriages to his recent onstage injuries that have called the future of his career into question, Phil has been plagued by tragedies since his early years. Join Facts First as we examine how the tragedy of Phil Collins just keeps getting worse. Phil Collins was a child actor. Phil Collins was born January 30th, 1951. His mother was a theatrical agent, which allowed young Phil an early entrance into the world of entertainment. With his mother's connections, young Phil worked as both an actor and a model during his childhood years. One of his most notable acting roles as a child came via a production of Oliver, in which Phil was cast as the character Jack Dawkins, or the Artful Dodger. Despite his early acting and modeling work, it quickly became apparent that the thing young Phil was most passionate about was making music. The young boy was particularly taken with the drums and began drumming for a few local bands during his school years. After making an early entrance into the music scene, Phil went on to join a band called Flaming Youth. In 1969, when Phil was a teen, the band released their first and only album, Arc 2. It wasn't a huge commercial success, but it proved a hit with critics. Flaming Youth sadly never recorded another album, though Arc 2 stands today as a cult favorite thanks to Phil's later fame. Once it became apparent Flaming Youth didn't have a future, Phil started looking for other bands to join. Several years later, he ended up joining the band Genesis as a replacement for original lead singer Peter Gabriel. However, before taking up with the band, Phil experienced his first brush with tragedy via the passing of his father. The tragic death of Phil Collins' father. While Phil's mother had been a theatrical agent, his father was an insurance agent. His father was named Greville, and he tragically passed away in 1972. Phil was busy trying to make a name for himself in the music scene at the time and wasn't afforded the opportunity to spend much time with his father during his final days. In fact, Phil wasn't even aware that his father's health was suffering. Greville had fallen ill, but the family kept the information from Phil out of fear it would mess up his career plans. They had also hoped that his father would recover, but things got worse and he passed away before his son could even be given the news that he wasn't feeling well. Phil was barely into adulthood when his father passed away from a heart attack on Christmas Day, 1972. In 1975, the same year he joined Genesis, Phil married his first wife, Andrea Bertarelli. Their marriage was plagued with numerous issues, and most of these stemmed from the fact that Phil was too busy with his new band. When Andrea gave birth to their first child, Phil had her induce labor so he could witness the birth and still be able to attend Genesis's upcoming concerts. Phil's first marriage ended poorly. It seems Phil Collins was much more focused on his work with his new band than his family. Phil didn't end up being around very much to help his wife take care of their new child. This was Simon, their son, and he's the first of 5 children Phil has had over the course of his life. His first wife was understandably upset about how little Phil was there for her after the birth of their son. Phil left to go perform with Genesis while Andrea was still recovering from the birth in the hospital, and the pair ended up divorcing after being married for only 5 years. This was in 1980, at which point Phil was first starting to transition away from his work with Genesis and start up his own successful solo career. His first big solo single was the song In the Air Tonight, which was about his first marriage. According to Phil, Andrea had left him for a house painter. As a result, Phil included a paint bucket and a paintbrush as part of the set when performing his new solo single On Top of the Pops. It seems Phil was fairly bitter about his first wife divorcing him and leaving him for another man, and the star did everything he could to keep the public on his side. Andrea came out many years later, claiming that Phil wasn't completely honest when it came to all the things he said about her in the press. Phil was certainly the one with the bigger public voice, and his story of what went down drowned out Andrea's. He tried to paint himself as a sympathetic figure, though it seems that much of what went wrong in his first marriage was his own fault. Before we tell you more about Phil Collins, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Phil Collins has been sued by 2 ex-wives. In October of 2016, Phil Collins released a memoir called Not Dead Yet. This memoir included accounts of Phil's first marriage. By this point, Andrea had suffered enough of Phil publicly dragging her through the mud and decided to sue her former husband for the disparaging stories the memoir contained. Surprisingly, this isn't the only time he's been sued by an ex-wife. Following his divorce from Andrea in 1980, Phil Collins went on to marry Jill Tavelman in 1984. This marriage came to an end in 1996 after it was revealed that Phil had been involved in an extramarital affair. During their separation, Phil faxed his second wife a long letter explaining how he felt. When the tabloids caught wind of this, they spun the story to make it seem as if the star had broken up with his second wife via fax. At this point, it seems the public just loved to hate on him. During their marriage, Phil and Jill had a daughter named Lily. Phil and Andrea had had a second child named Jolie before divorcing. Phil married his third and hitherto final wife in 1999, and her name is Oriane Sevi. Regrettably, Phil's relationship with Oriane has been his most tumultuous so far. The couple had 2 children early on, and then Oriane fell into a spell of postpartum depression. They ended up separating in 2006 before officially divorcing in 2008. During their marriage, Phil also began suffering from the first of many health problems. Phil Collins' long history of poor health. Early on during his marriage to Oriane, Phil suffered from an ear infection that left him half deaf. Sadly, this was merely the first of many health issues he's suffered from in the years since. Later in the decade, Phil was performing alongside former band Genesis during a reunion tour when he suffered a serious neck injury that required surgery. Even after the surgery, Phil found it hard to use his hands and could no longer play his preferred instruments. This neck injury eventually caused Phil to go into a period of retirement in 2011, though this sadly didn't help out much with the star's failing health. He attempted, during this period, to patch things up with Oriane and spent as much time as he could with her and their 2 kids. But things took a turn for the worse when Phil started drinking to pass the time. After his retirement, Phil became a full-blown alcoholic, and his alcoholism significantly worsened his already failing health. Shortly afterwards, Phil nearly passed away as a result of acute pancreatitis. The star eventually decided he needed to get back to work, so he came out of retirement in 2015. That year, he officially got back together with Oriane for a short period before their relationship soured once again. Later, Oriane would sue Phil after he sold the mansion they lived in together. In the years since coming out of retirement, Phil Collins' health has only gotten worse. He suffered several significant injuries, many of which were received during musical performances. It was the star's failing health that inspired him to publish his memoir. Phil Collins is now 71 years old, though he has many lifetimes worth of regrets. Now it's time to hear from you. What was the most surprising part of this story to you? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content. By the way, if you haven't joined Facts First as a member yet, be sure to look below this video and click the join button. By becoming a paid member of Facts First, you'll get access to exclusive video content that you won't find anywhere else.